In the corridors of the Mangaung Correctional Center, few prisoners drew more attention than inmate number 12 Mayain, a man whose reputation was as complex as it was dangerous. Officially, his name was Thabo Bester, but in the underworld he had another identity, Tom Motsepe, a successful, charismatic, self-made entrepreneur. What most people didn't know was that Tom Motsepe didn't exist. He was a ghost, a fabrication born from deception, digital manipulation, and sociopathic charm. Thabo Bester's story doesn't begin with the prison fire in 2022. It begins much earlier, with a boy who learned early how to lie, how to manipulate, and most importantly, how to make others bend to his will. Bester wasn't just a criminal. He was a master illusionist. And the prison system, media, and even medical professionals became actors in his show, some willingly, others unknowingly. But to understand the prison escape that rocked the country, we have to first understand the psychological profile of the man behind it. The making of a manipulator, Thabo Bester was born in Johannesburg in 1986. Raised by a single mother in poverty, he came into the world with very little, but developed a sharp instinct for survival. People who knew him in his teens often describe him as persuasive and oddly magnetic. He didn't just want attention, he demanded control. By his late teens and early 20s, Bester had already begun defrauding people online, posing as a modeling agency recruiter. Vulnerable young women were promised opportunities, only to be lured into abuse and exploitation. Bester was eventually convicted of rape and murder after the brutal killing of 26-year-old model and student Nomfundo Taihulu in 2011. He was sentenced to life in prison. But life behind bars didn't end his schemes. In fact, it elevated them. Incarcerated at Mangaung, a maximum security prison privately run by G4S, Bester began operating a digital scam operation known as 21st Century Media from inside his cell. He launched fake events, promised international investments, and convinced celebrities to appear at conferences that never existed. The most disturbing part? He did it all using the identity of Tom Motsepe, a supposed relative of billionaire businessman Patrice Motsepe. Bester wasn't just conning people. He was constructing an entire reality. Dr. Nandipha Magudumana, a surgeon meets a sociopath. Parallel to Bester's digital schemes, a strange relationship was quietly forming, one that would ultimately be key to his escape. Dr. Nandipha Magudumana was a well-known aesthetic doctor and entrepreneur. Beautiful, accomplished, and respected in high society circles, she owned a successful practice and had made appearances on various platforms promoting skincare and beauty. So how does a woman with so much to lose become entangled in the most scandalous prison break in modern South African history? The answer again lies in psychology. Bester had already started operating as Tom Motsepe when he met Dr. Nandipha in 2013, supposedly during one of his business ventures. Sources suggest he charmed her slowly, presenting himself as a successful businessman imprisoned unfairly. It's unclear exactly when the relationship turned romantic, but by the mid-2010s, she was visiting him frequently in prison, and not as a doctor. Over time, the boundaries between fantasy and reality blurred. Dr. Nandipha began using her medical license to sign off on documents and to access privileges no ordinary visitor could. Her professional credibility became a tool in Bester's expanding toolbox. To understand her involvement, you must understand the concept of coercive control, a psychological strategy often used by narcissists and sociopaths to dominate others through charm, manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional dependency. In many ways, Dr. Nandipha became Bester's puppet, but the more disturbing possibility, she may have been a co-architect. On May 3, 2022, prison guards at Mangaung discovered something horrifying. Cell 35, Bester's cell, was on fire. Inside, they found a charred body lying on the mattress, face down. It was quickly reported that Thabo Bester had died in a prison fire. Official cause of death, suicide. Within hours, journalists were reporting that South Africa's Facebook rapist had taken his own life. The Department of Correctional Services released a formal statement. The body was removed. The case was closed. But something didn't sit right. The autopsy report revealed that the person found in the cell had already been dead before the fire. The cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head. Even more suspicious, the body had no smoke inhalation damage. Whoever this was, they hadn't died in the fire. DNA results were delayed. The story faded. But beneath the surface, something far more sinister was unfolding. After the fire, reports began surfacing of Tom Motsepe, supposedly deceased, being seen in Johannesburg. There were receipts, photos, and even reports of Dr. Nandipha being with him in public places. Then came the hospital visits. In the months after Bester's supposed death, Dr. Nandipha arranged for several dead bodies to be removed from government morgues under her name. 2 of these were later traced back to her through forged documentation. It appeared that the couple had used one of these bodies as a stand-in for Bester during the prison fire. The body had been placed in cell 35, set alight, and used to fake a suicide. What kind of mind executes a plan like this? From a psychological standpoint, this wasn't just a prison escape. It was a high-level narcissistic fantasy come to life. Bester was re-entering the world not as a fugitive, but as a man who had died and returned with a new identity. He could be anyone now. He chose to become Tom Motsepe again. The mask begins to slip. Journalists started connecting the dots. Ground Up, an investigative news platform, ran a series of stories poking holes in the prison's version of events. With every article, the walls began to close in. By March 2023, almost a year after the escape, the Department of Correctional Services admitted the unthinkable. Thabo Bester was alive. He had faked his death, escaped prison, and had been living as a free man, with the help of Dr. Nandipha. What followed was a manhunt that gripped the entire nation. The man South Africa thought was dead was in fact very much alive and living in luxury. The manhunt and the mask of normalcy. After almost a year in the shadows, Thabo Bester had successfully slipped out of the pages of history and into the everyday world, wearing a new face, using old tricks, and hiding behind wealth that didn't exist. But freedom for a man like Bester wasn't about anonymity. It was about dominance. And he wasn't hiding in a cave. He was walking through luxury boutiques, booking expensive Airbnbs, and attending private events with a woman whose medical career was now a front for something much darker. Rebuilding the empire. A fugitive's fantasy. Bester and Dr. Nandipha fled Mangaung, but they didn't flee into poverty or isolation. Instead, they resumed their lives in Johannesburg's most expensive neighborhoods. With fraudulent IDs and forged documents, they rented properties in Hyde Park and Sandton. Not shacks or hideouts, but high-end estates with modern finishes, smart home systems, and private security. They lived as if nothing had happened. According to neighbors and landlords, the couple appeared perfectly ordinary, if not glamorous. She introduced herself as a successful doctor. He was TK Nkwana, a quiet, polished businessman. No one suspected that TK was the most wanted man in South Africa. This is where the psychological layers deepen. In clinical psychology, such behavior reflects psychopathic tendencies, notably grandiosity, lack of remorse, and a desire to deceive for personal gain. Thabo Bester didn't simply escape. He orchestrated a resurrection and lived it with zero guilt. But what about Dr. Nandipha? Why would a successful woman with 2 daughters, a career and status, risk everything for a man like this? The deeper answer lies in what psychologists call trauma bonding, an emotional attachment that forms between an abuser and their victim, often involving cycles of abuse, manipulation, and intermittent reinforcement. Over time, the victim becomes entangled in the abuser's world and can lose sight of right and wrong. In this relationship, the power imbalance was always tilted toward Bester, but he was clever enough to make her believe it was love. While the couple was playing house, ground-up journalists were pulling threads. They unearthed property leases under false names, connected security footage of Bester shopping post-escape, and even located financial trails from the prison fire to purchases made afterward. Pressure mounted on government institutions. The Department of Correctional Services, G4S, and even the police were forced to reopen the case. Public outrage exploded. How had the system failed so catastrophically? But what alarmed South Africans the most wasn't just that Bester had escaped. It was that he'd done it with help from the outside and help from the inside. Guards at Mangaung began to be questioned. Some were suspended. Others resigned. Allegations of bribery, document forgery, and deliberate negligence surfaced. Bester's escape hadn't been a spontaneous jailbreak. It had been a coordinated conspiracy, one that included G4S staff, forged legal documents, morgue employees, and a government system asleep at the wheel. This wasn't a hole in the fence. It was an open door. As the media storm grew, Bester and Dr. Nandipha realized their time was running out. The couple left Johannesburg, zigzagged across provinces, and eventually crossed into Zimbabwe before heading north to Tanzania. They were now international fugitives. What's chilling is how calculated every move was. They used burner phones. They switched rental cars. They stayed in hotels under assumed identities. They paid for everything in cash. Their movements reflected paranoia, but also discipline. In the field of criminal psychology, fugitives often behave erratically when on the run. But Bester and Dr. Nandipha didn't spiral. They didn't argue. They didn't separate. Instead, they moved with eerie synchronicity, almost like they rehearsed it. This kind of cohesion speaks to what's known as a shared delusional disorder, or folie à deux, a psychiatric syndrome in which delusional beliefs are transmitted from one individual to another. In some cases, a dominant personality, like Bester, imposes their worldview on a more submissive partner, like Nandipha, who then adopts and internalizes the same false reality. In their minds, they weren't fugitives. They were a power couple evading an unjust system. The capture in Tanzania on April 7, 2023, Tanzanian authorities located and arrested the pair in Arusha, near the Kenyan border. They were found with multiple fake passports, multiple cell phones, over a dozen SIM cards, forged birth certificates, and travel documents. The couple was reportedly preparing to flee to Rwanda, and from there possibly Europe or Dubai. Photos from their arrest showed a far cry from the curated Instagram lives they once led. Dr. Nandipha's face was solemn. Bester, always the actor, maintained his blank, unreadable expression. But even then, he wasn't panicking. Because for people like Thabo Bester, master manipulators, consequences are just another act in the play. The extradition process was swift. Both were flown back to South Africa on April 13, 2023. The country watched as Thabo Bester walked off the plane in handcuffs, no longer the illusionist, but a man finally exposed. Dr. Nandipha, once the face of modern beauty and female empowerment, arrived in a separate plane, defeated, disheveled, and silent. In court appearances, Bester maintained a quiet arrogance. No remorse, no apology, just eyes scanning the room, calculating. Dr. Nandipha, by contrast, appeared broken, yet still in moments defiant. She requested bail. She denied knowledge. She cried. But she never turned on Bester. Even when the prosecution laid out a damning case. Even when the public called for justice. Even when her children were taken into protective care. The legal fallout and psychological toll. As of now, both face multiple charges. Thabo Bester, escape from lawful custody, fraud, murder, and identity theft. Dr. Nandipha, aiding and abetting escape, corpse violation, fraud, and defeating the ends of justice. Over 12 other individuals, including prison staff and morgue employees, have been implicated. But deeper than the legal fallout is the psychological one. South Africans were left questioning their institutions. The Department of Correctional Services, G4S, and even SAPS became targets of public fury. How could one man manipulate so many? How did no one notice? The truth is, many did, but they were either silenced, complicit, or unaware of just how deep the deception ran. The mastermind's mind, Thabo Bester, is not your average criminal. He exhibits classic traits of antisocial personality disorder, commonly associated with psychopathy. Charming yet manipulative, emotionally cold, no empathy or remorse, willing to exploit anyone for personal gain. But his intelligence, both emotional and strategic, is what sets him apart. He didn't just deceive, he created worlds. He controlled narratives. He seduced not just people, but entire systems. In many ways, he weaponized psychology. And Dr. Nandipha? Whether a victim, participant, or something in between, she became the mirror in which Bester saw his genius reflected. G4S and the crumbling prison system as Thabo Bester sat in his prison cell, before the fire, before the escape, he was already mapping out the weaknesses of the system that was supposed to contain him. His escape didn't just expose individual failures. It unraveled an entire prison industrial complex held together by negligence, profit, and mismanagement. At the center of it all was G4S, a British multinational company contracted to run the Mangaung Correctional Center, one of only 2 privately operated prisons in South Africa. And now, under the burning spotlight of public scrutiny, the questions began to mount. How does a man escape from a maximum security prison in the 21st century? And why was a private company allowed to govern the liberty of some of South Africa's most dangerous offenders? Mangaung Correctional Center, located in Bloemfontein, was touted as a state-of-the-art facility when it opened. But behind the high walls and security cameras, it became a pressure cooker of abuse, staff shortages, and internal decay. Investigative reports dating back years painted a disturbing picture. Wardens using electroshock devices on inmates. Long-term solitary confinement without psychological support. Frequent riots. Lack of proper inmate monitoring. When Bester staged his escape using a burnt body, the prison didn't alert the authorities until much later. Even more disturbing? The control room footage from the night of the escape disappeared. G4S reported it was unavailable due to technical reasons. In any secure facility, this would be suspicious. In a maximum security prison, it was catastrophic. It became clear to the public this wasn't just a lapse. It was a cover-up. Profit versus protection. The problem with private prisons. The Bester escape reignited debates around the role of private companies in criminal justice. Private prisons operate on a basic principle. They are paid per inmate. This creates a perverse incentive, where cost-cutting may be prioritized over security or rehabilitation. Staff are underpaid, undertrained, and overworked. Surveillance becomes patchy. Reporting becomes reactive rather than proactive. And the culture of accountability starts to vanish. In Mangaung, these cracks became gaping holes. G4S claimed innocence. They blamed rogue employees. They insisted protocols were followed. But internal whistleblowers told a different story. One of bribery, forged papers, forged exit authorizations, and blind eyes turned for the right price. The escape of Thabo Bester was a symptom. The disease was systemic. The enablers within to escape prison, Bester needed more than just a plan. He needed co-conspirators. And they weren't on the outside. They were on the inside. Evidence showed that a G4S employee opened the cell for Bester on the night of the fire. The body used in the fire had been smuggled in days earlier. Documents were falsified to identify the burned body as Bester's. CCTV footage was tampered with or deleted. Exit records were manipulated. This wasn't a simple breakout. It was an inside job, one with dozens of moving parts. One where almost every layer of the institution failed. And the most alarming part? Bester didn't use force. He used manipulation. It's a disturbing reality. Not every prison break is violent. Some are psychological. And Bester, a man with a history of deception, had already shown how easily he could convince strangers to hand over their money, their time, even their dignity. In a high-stakes prison system filled with underpaid guards and overworked staff, he found the perfect environment for exploitation. State response: too little, too late. Once the news of his escape became public in 2023, nearly a year after it happened, the Department of Correctional Services went into full crisis mode. Ministers gave press conferences. Promises were made. G4S was investigated. Contracts were questioned. But to many South Africans, the reaction was performative. Where had they been when he escaped? Where were the oversight mechanisms? How was it possible that a body could be smuggled into a prison without a single red flag? The reality is bureaucracy moves slowly. But Bester moved fast. And by the time the system caught up, he was in Tanzania. Trust in institutions, broken and bleeding. Perhaps the most enduring consequence of the Bester case is the collapse of public trust. Citizens rely on the criminal justice system to maintain order. But what happens when it's exposed as vulnerable, corruptible, not only by bribes but by charm? The escape wasn't just a breach of security. It was a psychological breach. It told millions of South Africans, the system isn't protecting you, it can be played. And Bester didn't need a gun to do it. He just needed charisma. The psychology of power and deception. Let's take a step back and look again at the man at the center of it all. Thabo Bester wasn't powerful in the traditional sense. He had no military, no political party, no fortune. But he had something far more dangerous: manipulative intelligence. In clinical psychology, his behaviors closely match characteristics of a high-functioning sociopath. Superficial charm, pathological lying, lack of guilt, inability to form genuine emotional bonds. Grandiose sense of self-worth. Such individuals don't just lie, they craft realities. They find emotional loopholes in people. They use love, fear, desperation, even dreams to gain control. And once they do, they don't use force. They use you. Bester's ability to enlist others into his schemes, from prison guards to morgue workers to a respected doctor, is chilling because it reflects something deeper about human psychology. We're all susceptible to manipulation when the right psychological buttons are pushed. The role of the media and public outrage. If not for persistent journalism, this story may have stayed buried. Ground Up, an independent media outlet, played a critical role in exposing the inconsistencies in Bester's supposed death. They followed paper trails, contacted families, and kept asking uncomfortable questions when others were silent. This case became a masterclass in how powerful investigative journalism can be. But it also showed how quickly public opinion can be manipulated. When the story broke, South Africans were horrified, not just at Bester, but at how close he got to them. He walked among them, attended events, flew in private jets, posed in photos, and even booked business meetings, all while supposedly dead. It shattered the illusion of safety, and it created a hunger for justice. Dr. Nandipha, victim or villain? The debate around Dr. Nandipha continues to rage. On the one hand, she helped orchestrate the escape. She used her credentials, resources, and connections to build a fake life for Bester. She rented homes, laundered money, and moved bodies. But others argue she was manipulated, that she was groomed, that she may have suffered emotional or psychological abuse that clouded her moral compass. This duality, victim and villain, is not uncommon in cases of manipulation. But here's the truth. In law, complicity is complicity. And she will be judged not by how she felt, but by what she did. Still, for psychologists, her dissent remains one of the most fascinating elements of the case. It challenges the assumption that intelligence protects against deception. It doesn't.